Consumers access press content nowadays primarily online. On the internet, press publishers face new challenges when they compete for the attention of consumers. I will focus on two challenges here. These can be illustrated with two examples. The first example is a court case which the press fought against the German public broadcasters starting in 2011. The case concerned a mobile application for news, the Tagesschau app. Tagesschau is the most successful service of daily TV news in Germany. The app would provide users not only with access to streams by the public news service, but it would also provide them with online articles not necessarily related to the streamed TV news. The second example concerns a dispute with Google. This dispute started almost at the same time as the Tagesschau case. It concerned small text excerpts of news articles which Google provided in its search results, so-called snippets. The conflict around the Tagesschau app was resolved when politics intervened and forced public broadcasters and the press into a compromise. This compromise is now enshrined in a media state treaty of the German Länder. The snippet issue has occupied both German and EU legislature as well as the courts, but without coming to a real end so far. It is also part of the pending Federal Cartel Office proceedings concerning the Google News showcase. From a competition lawyer's perspective, both examples come along with many unknowns. This makes it difficult at first glance to say much about them. However, the press appears to have put up a poor show, at least in that it has not embraced the competition. Instead, it has only tried to block offers by rivals. This impression, however, is not entirely fair to the press. Sorry, I jumped out of my presentation. Now you should see it again once more. So let me provide some background information before we deal with the issues associated with the Tagesschau app and Google snippets. First of all, let's take a look at the following. The market situation for press products on the one hand, and the state infrastructure to protect the public interests associated with media content on the other. As concerns the market definition, a key distinction must be made between traditional print reader and ad markets, as well as online markets. Regarding print readers, different markets can be defined based on the criteria of publication time, daily or weekly, distribution area, local, regional, national, and distribution channels, subscription or street sales. Thus, the German print readers markets are rather fragmented. The supply chain for press products is complex as well. It includes both printed and online press products, and in that context mirrors what I said about the markets. On top, we have the content creators, for example, journalists. These may combine in collecting societies, and the collecting societies then defend their remuneration interests jointly. The journalists are either freelancers or they are employed at publishing houses. News publishers then make available the press content either online or offline. When they do it online, they use or at least benefit from the services of access providers and other infrastructure operators, as well as host providers, making their content available to consumers. When they deliver press content offline, they work together with press and book wholesalers as well as retailers. It should be noted that firms with market power may operate at virtually all levels of this supply chain, except at the level of content creators and the level of consumers. The publishers' markets are actually often monopolized as well, at least for regional and local newspapers. This, however, does not mean much given the small scale of many relevant markets. Moreover, cross-media dependencies must be taken into account, which exist, for example, when a newspaper and a TV station compete for readers or ad customers. Interestingly, in this supply chain, the copyright law still assumes that content creators, like journalists, are in a position to effectively enforce their interests. That is definitely not the case. If we look at the statistics, we see that the economic situation for the press in Germany is difficult. In fact, among all media, TV is still most popular with consumers by far. Left-hand column. Internet use is on the rise, but still lags behind. Second column. The same applies for radio listening. Third column. Book and newsprint consumption are negligible in comparison. That's the lower half of the statistics. When we look at the income situation, we see that the online video industry is on a success path. Public broadcasting benefits from state funding, so the income situation for broadcasters looks okay as well. The income of newsprint publishers, however, is slowly declining, although the hardest time was over way before the coverage area of these statistics started. Interestingly, if we look at the different age groups, then both TV and printed press consumption appear to be things of the past. You find the older generations here, but you don't find many young people. The state infrastructure to protect the public interest in media liberty is quite significant in Germany. This is due to a national media tycoon and historic person, Alfred Hugenberg, who was influential in bringing Adolf Hitler to power. Nowadays, the German state wants to avoid any buildup of opinion power, which ultimately might threaten the existence of the democratic system. The state is using federal legislation to regulate the provision of general online content, and it is using Länder legislation for broadcasting and press content. Supervisory powers are being exercised mainly by the Länder media agencies, which supervise private media. Moreover, several commissions exist that supervise private broadcasters and manage the funding of public broadcasters. The state interest in preventing a buildup of opinion power also has led to a special competition regime. Broadcasters, and particularly the press, are subject to special competition rules. For merger control, these rules run largely in parallel. In practice, the merger control regime is important particularly for the press. This is due to substantial consolidation pressure in the print readers markets. Merger control kicks in at much lower turnover figures for broadcasters and the press than for products that are not relevant for the forming of an opinion. The broadened ambit of merger control is intended to protect the independence of editing boards. By way of exception, in restructuring cases, the substantive rules are loosened a bit for press mergers to keep newsprint publishers in the market. Unlike merger control, the control of coordinated conduct is relaxed for the press. This is because coordination allows the press to generate more income, and at the same time, it can take place without compromising the independence of editing boards. Thus, Section 30 of the German Competition Act includes several exceptions from the general cartel prohibition in Section 1. One of these exceptions is for horizontal agreements of newsprint and magazine publishers for cooperation. Moreover, several exceptions exist for vertical measures. One is for resale prices imposed by publishers for newspapers and magazines. Another exception exists for agreements between publishers and press wholesalers. Many of these exceptions came into the law only after 2010. In the last decade, the publishing numbers of printed newspapers have gone down continuously. The German legislature apparently saw a need to allow coordinated conduct to overcome the associated challenges. However, the German press does not only suffer from declining demand, it also suffers from being in a sandwich position between the state-funded public broadcasters and the big online gatekeepers. With this, let's turn to the two scenarios I wanted to present to you. Let's first take a look at the conflict between the press and the public broadcasters. The conflict about the Tagesschau app has proved to be a conflict about market or cross-market power, which, perhaps not intentionally, risk to be used to oust the press from online reader markets. But why? The answer to this question cannot be found in looking at the markets alone. It is also, and probably even more important, to take into consideration constitutional law. The German constitution, the Basic Law, considers broadcasting to be crucial for the voters' formation of opinions. The Basic Law itself does not define what it considers to be broadcasting. Thus, the broadcasting term must be concretized by legislature. The competence for that lies with the German states, the Länder. The Länder concluded several broadcasting and media interstate treaties among each other already. These interstate treaties list various broadcasting services. In addition, although the Basic Law does not say what it considers to be broadcasting, the Federal Constitutional Court has derived several elements for that from Article 5 of the Basic Law, which includes the broadcasting freedom. And these elements basically complement the definitions set out in the interstate treaties. According to the Constitutional Court, broadcasting is the, quote, leading medium for opinion and will formation due to its broad impact on society, unquote. As the leading medium, it includes the linear broadcasting services available at the time the Basic Law entered into force, that is, radio and TV. The court has not ruled explicitly yet on whether the broadcasting freedom now also extends to online services. However, It has ruled that on-demand services similar to broadcasting should be included. Moreover, the court's jurisprudence suggests that an editorial activity is another constituting element of broadcasting. Thus, an editing board must exist that moderates the broadcasted content. It is this moderating function that allows broadcasters to be transmitters of information. The court labels this as the medium function of broadcasters. Moreover, the presentation and selection of information contributes to the process of opinion and will formation on the voter's side. The court labels this as the factor function of broadcasters. Given these important functions, medium function and factor function, the court has derived a guarantee of the existence and development of broadcasting from Article 5 of the Basic Law. This guarantee comes along with certain state obligations. Notably, the state has to establish conditions to ensure that the diversity of opinion is represented as broadly and completely as possible in broadcasting. The state also has to take precautions against any emergence of dominant opinion power. The state is generally free how to meet these obligations. In particular, it has options how to fashion the national broadcasting system from the outset. The legislature can provide for only one public broadcaster, which then has to guarantee the pluralism of opinions internally. Alternative, however, it can allow several broadcasters that guarantee pluralism through external competition. The legislature is and remains free under Article 5 to change the system also later on. However, if legislature opts for an external pluralism system, including private broadcasters, these companies are then protected in their freedom of activity. The broadcasters and consumers are likewise protected under Article 5. This protection triggers additional duties for the state regarding the organization of the TV and radio program, market access, supervision, etc. The German legislature has opted for a mixed system with public and private broadcasters. This has led to far-reaching constitutional jurisprudence, which many consider to be out of balance nowadays. The starting point of this jurisprudence was defined by the state interest in the diversity of opinion and the prevention of opinion power. The broadcasting freedom fulfills a so-called serving function in that regard. Thus, public broadcasters have both fundamental rights and fundamental duties. The duties culminate in a so-called fundamental service mandate. This mandate is an objective dimension of fundamental rights, but as well the administrative purpose of public broadcasters. As competition lawyers, we may conclude that public broadcasters provide a service of general interest. The constitutional protection, however, reaches beyond this. Purely commercial activities would not be considered to be services of general economic interest. For the Constitutional Court, in contrast, the purpose of the institution also includes economic activities that are reasonably related to the fundamental service mandate. The fundamental service mandate allows public broadcasters to choose and present the broadcasted content by themselves. And this is not limited to a basic or minimum service. Instead, public broadcasters are constitutionally empowered to provide a comprehensive range of programs for the entire population, including entertainment and sports. If there is any limit to that, then this limit is that public broadcasters have to provide an overall service which is still distinct from what private broadcasters are offering. The last consideration obviously implies that private broadcasters are not fulfilling the fundamental service mandate in the existing system. The Constitutional Court has explained why this is the case. Private broadcasters depend on a mass audience and advertising revenues, etc. Thus, their information services cannot be considered to be as unbiased and reliable as public broadcasting services. In view of their constitutional role, public broadcasters benefit from wide-ranging exceptions from the EU competition rules. EU competition law applies to public broadcasters as participants in the EU internal market. Under Article 106, Section 2 TFEU, however, their services in the general economic interest are subject to competition law only to the extent that the application of the competition rules does not endanger the services. Furthermore, Protocol number 29 broadly exempts state aid funding for public broadcasters to a large extent from EU state aid control. In particular, public broadcasters are allowed to define the services themselves that are financed by the state. In that context, they also benefit from fundamental rights protection under Article 11 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. For market participants that do not benefit from the same constitutional protection, this state aid funding is a big challenge. And this is also the case for the press. Article 5 of the Basic Law guarantees also the freedom of the press. However, the Constitutional Court interprets this freedom in a way that largely deprives the press of protection vis-à-vis the public broadcasters. According to the court, the press contributes to the diversity of opinion through competition between privately owned and operated editorial press organs. The protection covers all printed products intended for dissemination. Moreover, it covers all activities from information procurement to the dissemination of press products. Whether it also covers online activities is still unclear. However, the Constitutional Court has not recognized any state obligation concerning a fundamental service mandate fulfilled by the press. For this reason, it has also accepted that the press may depend on a mass audience and advertising revenues. The problem with this jurisprudence is that the Constitutional Court blends out the competitive situation across media. Consequently, the press is largely left without constitutional protection if the public broadcasters develop a service like the Tagesschau app. Some limited competition law protection exists, though. This is because the European Commission has already tried to use its remaining stated competences in relation to German public broadcasters. This initiative led to the State Aid Compromise of 2007, which established at least some procedural safeguards against the public broadcasters' expansion of services. Moreover, the German Monopolies Commission argued in its biennial report number 22 that public broadcasting, given that it represents a state function, must define its mission as clearly as possible. Otherwise, it would be unclear what is to be protected as broadcasting at all. As recommended by the Monopolies Commission, the Länder indeed imposed an obligation through the Media Interstate Treaty. Thus, the public broadcasters have to clearly define the scope of online news services and to heed the differences to the offers of the press. This obligation had the effect that the Tagesschau app is today providing mainly streaming content and less text-based content than the broadcasters had planned originally. Nevertheless, the conflict concerning the Tagesschau app shows that the business model of press publishers is constantly at risk in the online world, at least in Germany. This is because the press doesn't enjoy strong legal protection in competition with the state. And the state is not the only powerful market participant the press has to deal with. As noted before, the press is exposed also to competition from big online players, in particular, the operators of large ad-financed online platforms such as Facebook or Google. The relationship of the press with these platforms is ambivalent. On the one hand, they provide traffic to the online content of news publishers and support the publishers in their advertising activities. On the other hand, there is always a risk that platform operators abuse the dependency of news publishers to reap benefits which they could not reap if this dependency did not exist. In the view of the German news publishers, this risk has materialized through the appropriation of the publishers' online news content already. News publishers had started experimenting with paid content around 2012. Around the same time, Google experimented with improvements to its news aggregation services. One of these improvements was that Google would show small excerpts from news content to users when providing links to online press articles, so-called snippets. As a consequence, users were less likely to click on the links because they obtained relevant information already through the snippets. Hence, news publishers complained that Google was skimming off the value of the information from the press articles for itself. These were not the only complaints. Online service providers in general complained at the time that platform operators were increasingly appropriating user-generated content such as images, product, and hotel reviews. In all these instances, however, it was doubtful whether the relevant content actually enjoyed legal protection. Most importantly, copyrights do not protect the value of information, but only the right to make accessible works through which this information is conveyed. Nevertheless, publishers tried to argue that Google infringed their copyrights. In parallel, news publishers tried to develop arguments that Google's conduct was violating the competition rules. Indeed, it might raise concerns if publishers could avoid contents being used only by foregoing inclusion in the dominant search engine's web index altogether. However, publishers were not very successful with their arguments. This was although they actually managed to make German legislature intervene. Legislature amended the National Copyright Act in 2013 to establish a specific copyright for snippets. That amendment, however, quickly proved useless because Google refused to pay for the display of news content. In fact, Google argued that it was actually providing a service to the press. Google was directing users to the publishers' websites, thus generating traffic. Thus, if anyone, then not Google should pay, but rather the publishers. The Publishers Collecting Society also filed a competition complaint with the German Federal Cartel Office. However, this complaint proved fruitless as well. The FCO declined to intervene. It reasoned that Google was free to decide how it designed its ranking algorithm. Google was also free to decide how it displayed search results. And this was the core of Google's business. The FCO was not in a position to impose obligations on Google as long as the displayed results were relevant for users. The FCO was even less well placed to require Google to show search results with snippets, which would trigger an obligation for Google to pay. A court in Berlin sided with the FCO's decision in 2016. Thus, publishers had basically already lost their case way before the European Court of Justice declared the German copyright amendment to violate EU law. The court found a violation for formal reasons. However, publishers still were not ready to give up at that time. Instead, they now lobbied the EU legislature to improve the protection of right holders. The EU legislature finalized the new EU Copyright Directive in 2019. The directive became notorious because of its Article 17 on pirate copies. However, it also included an Article 15, Section 1, which introduced another payment obligation for snippets. This provision was transposed through another amendment to the German Copyright Act. This amendment is in line with the directive, but again, it could not pacify the situation. This was because it was phrased in a way that it remained unclear whether text excerpts used by search engines were actually covered by copyright protection. If the amendment contained any improvement, then this improvement was that journalists and other producers of creative content must be granted a share of income generated through the use of their works. But be it as it may, Google did not exploit the legal uncertainty associated with the new rules. Instead, Google reached agreements with several press publishers in 2021 and 2022. The agreements allowed Google to display so-called extended news previews using the publisher's content. It is not clear why Google entered into these agreements. However, critics have pointed out that they divide cooperating and non-cooperating publishers. Moreover, it is noteworthy that a similar issue like the snippet issue emerged in Germany last year. That is the issue of so-called zero-click content. It was noted that Google and also Facebook have started to incorporate the relevant information from third-party websites in the displayed content on their own websites more broadly. This removes the need for users to click on any provided links, which would make users leave the services of Google and Facebook. In addition, Note that the successor to the collecting society complaining to the FCO has continued to remain outside of the agreements between Google and the press publishers. This is noteworthy because that successor managed to make the FCO start a new investigation in 2021. This investigation is about the Google News showcase and has not been concluded yet. The showcase investigation concerns a product that Google has offered to news publishers to provide a forum for edited press content. Google agreed with local newspapers to publish such content in highlighted story panels. The service is available in Germany for users of the Google News app, but not to users of the general search app. The service is said to be another measure to come to good terms with willing publishers and to divide publishers. However, it is also said to be not very successful in Germany. The FCO's investigation into this service is the second proceeding which the FCO launched under Section 19a, subsection 2 of the German Competition Act, after the Facebook Oculus investigation, which started as a general abuse proceeding. The investigation was originally based on the following concerns. First, that Google would engage in self-preferencing if it were to integrate the service in its general search. Second, that Google unfairly hindered publishers to exercise their copyrights regarding snippets. And third, that Google was granting access to its service only on discriminatory conditions. Again, Google chose a cooperative stance. It offered to modify the showcase service in several respects, and it is thus unclear whether the investigation will proceed any further. The EU legislature is aware of the difficulties which press publishers are facing on the internet. That said, it has to tread carefully because media control is a sensitive matter. Thus, interference with national media competences might backfire. Aside from the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which I'd like to disregard here, particularly 3 pieces of legislation can have an impact on the situation of European media firms in the future. The Digital Markets Act, or DMA, the Digital Services Act, or DSA, and the proposed EU Media Freedom Act. The DMA is of interest when we look at the complaints of news publishers in relation to Google and other large online platform operators. Indeed, considering the approach adopted for the DMA, one may wonder whether the German publisher's first complaint with the FCO really did not have any merit at all. For instance, the publishers heavily depended on Google to reach online readers. Thus, it could be argued that Google enjoyed some kind of gatekeeper position in relation to news publishers. It could perhaps even be argued that by forcing news publishers to accept the ranking of news content without payment, Google exploited its dominant position in online search. The fact that Google also generated traffic for news publishers does not necessarily militate against that line of arguments, for it is still an open question whether Google reaped more substantial benefits from the ranking of news content than the publishers. It is also an open question whether Google's conduct raised entry barriers for other providers of news aggregation services, which might constitute foreclosure. The Digital Markets Act includes indeed some provisions for large platforms qualifying as gatekeepers, which may be relevant for the press. It notably includes conduct obligations regarding the advertising business of gatekeepers. However, it does not include obligations specifically targeting the readers' markets. Thus, it does not contain any prohibition to engage in an exploitation of snippets either. The Digital Services Act includes several layers of further obligations for online intermediaries. Thus, host service providers have to eliminate illegal third-party products from their platforms, including counterfeit products. Large online platforms have to meet additional tightened obligations. These obligations resemble the obligations in the Copyright Directive concerning pirate content. Moreover, the DSA also includes provisions for the protection of fundamental user rights, for example, in the case of wrongfully deleted content. Nonetheless, also the DSA does not deal with the snippets issue explicitly. As I said, there is a third proposal out there, the EU Media Freedom Act, or EMFR. The EMFR includes obligations for very large online platforms which complement the DSA. It also includes rules to increase the transparency of state funding provided to media services providers, including public broadcasters. Yet, the EMFR does not address the issue of public broadcasters expanding their service portfolio into areas covered by the press, nor does the EMFR address the issue of large platforms appropriating press content. To conclude, the German press has been in a difficult competitive situation already for years now. It is operating on fragmented readers' markets. It is losing consumers on the readers' markets due to other online services providers. And the press is subject to competitive pressure from the public broadcasters. The public broadcasters benefit from state funding and have already shown an interest to expand their service portfolio into areas traditionally covered by the press in the past. Neither existing nor proposed EU legislation effectively addresses this issue. Whether the current media state treaty of the German Länder is going to alleviate this risk permanently remains to be seen. The press is likewise exposed to the risk of others appropriating its content on the internet. This risk materialized in the past when large platform operators like Google expanded their service offer. The existing or proposed EU legislation does not address this issue either. Whether the current FCO proceedings in the showcase matter will have an impact remains to be seen as well. Despite being under pressure, the German press seems to weather the described challenges actually quite well. When you talk to people working in the business, they are confident that they are able to adapt to the changing market and to fend off their competitors, although this is difficult. With this positive note, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.